What do investors want to hear?
They all want to hear completely opposite, different things. We probably have, at this point, a couple hundred different versions of our deck, all tailored to whoever we were speaking to. If you say pitching to J&J versus pitching to Intuitive, two very different businesses, two very different perspectives on lung cancer and surgery, right? With angels, their motivation is different. Of course, they want to make a return. Of course, they want to make money off of their investment. But often they're in it because they want to spend their time. They're retired. They want to mentor you. So allowing that and making sure that relationship is actually going to add value is really important. And then finally, with the corporates, they're putting you up against the rest of their portfolio. They're like, where do these guys fit? Where will they fit in 5 years when they're closer to commercial? It can fall apart because one person said no out of 50 people looking at it.
What does the name pronothoracic mean? How did you even come up with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So thoracic, I think, is obvious, right? Thoracic surgery. And we wanted to make sure that people knew right away that we were in the lung space. Prana is actually of Indian origin. So Sanskrit, one of the oldest languages in the world. Prana means breath of life. I thought that was such an appropriate and interesting name. As I mentioned, I'm of Indian heritage and thought we'd do something a little different.
So for all those engineers that want to be entrepreneurs and they don't know what de novo means
Yep.
for some reason, where does it fall on the spectrum? What makes it unique?
Yep. On the spectrum of ways to get through the FDA as a device, on one end, you have 510K, which is devices that there's enough technology out there that is close enough that FDA is comfortable with the level of risk to allow most technologies to get on the market with just a little bit of data. On the other end of the spectrum, you have PMA, pre-market approval. These are the heart pumps. These are the implants. These are the things that are really life-sustaining. And de novo's in the middle of those things. So de novo is a way to get medium risk devices that are truly novel. So there isn't anything out there that's exactly like them. So they can't go through this 510K pathway, but they're also not so high risk that they need hundreds and hundreds of patients worth of data to get through the market. This is a middle ground in terms of risk, but also in terms of regulatory burden.
Talk about Houston and talk about what Texas gives as a support structure for medical device innovation. What could also be improved about it?
Yeah, I think in any ecosystem, there are always gaps. And so there are gaps, I would say, in really experienced senior talent, right? Especially as companies grow into that Series B, Series C commercial stage in our world. We don't have a whole lot of that talent here just yet. The other piece I would say is funding can be a challenge, right? I think Houston being, and Texas in general, not necessarily having the history of medical innovation in terms of commercialization. We have plenty of incredible medical research that's done here, but in terms of actually translating that to the bedside, we don't have a million great stories like some of the other ecosystems do. And so because of that, the funding ecosystem, there's still room for everyone to grow into really being sophisticated in this space.
Talk about Houston and talk about what Texas gives as a support structure for medical device innovation. What's good
Absolutely.
about it?
So I think that tight-knittedness of the community, the tight-knittedness of the network is such a unique strength that even though funding is limited, as I mentioned, I don't think I've ever hesitated or any of the CEOs will hesitate to make an introduction, to connect you to an investor, to connect you to a resource, because we know that honestly, everyone's bringing it up together. Everyone's better together.
And so congratulations on the Series A, but part of that also came from a Texas grant,
Yes.
which is what?
We had an incredible grant from the Cancer Prevention Research Institute of Texas. So it's called CPRIT. And this is taxpayer dollars that were really put together, that the initiative was put together for two purposes. One is to retain the incredible technology that's invented at MD Anderson, at Baylor, at Southwestern, all of these different incredible institutions. The IP that is created there was often being sent off to the coast to commercialize, right? And so retaining that IP and then also retaining the talent attached to that IP, that was one purpose of it. The second purpose of it was to attract. So retention was one big piece, attracting talent, attracting technology to be based here in Texas and to build out their clinical research plans, to build out their teams here. That is the purpose of that granting entity.
Having investor experience Does that make you a better medical device entrepreneur?
Oh, definitely. It was transformative for my career, for sure, because you're never going to have the empathy for the investor, right? Because especially, I think before I had the investor experience, I went in thinking, oh, all funds have they have these diligence checklists and they score you and they have all of these very quantitative ways of deciding if you're a fit or not. And the reality is that's not true. A lot of the time it is qualitative. A lot of the time they're calling up their buddy that's a thoracic surgeon or their buddy that's maybe not even in your space and trying to get feedback there to figure out if what you're working on is a real problem or not. And so I think once you realize investors are just people too, and they're figuring it out as they go as well, and they're making stuff up as they go as well, that really helps, I think, from the entrepreneur's perspective. One, it makes rejection easier, right?
What are some core fundamentals that should be in a medical device slide deck?
I would say MedTech entrepreneurs are usually engineers, physicians, and they love the tinkering, they love the problem, and that's what they want to talk about. That's not what most investors want to hear. That's not most investors' background. And they're looking for all the other boxes, right? So I think definitely trying to figure out how can you explain a complex medical issue in the simplest terms possible, right? Talk about your plan to exit. I think that's the thing that a lot of people will forget is who is interested in this space, who's going to buy you, right? Or if there's any other path to exit. I think highlighting that in a 15 slide deck is really important. And yeah, I think timeline, those kinds of things. I think most of these things are pretty obvious. The biggest piece of advice I would have is pull away from over focusing on the technology and the science.
Has there ever been a time where you were challenged as an entrepreneur by an investor, but because you knew that psychology, you were actually able to overcome a potential challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my favorite story from the whole fundraising and diligence process was at some point we were pitching an angel network and they were really pushing, it was a Q&A call, and they were really pushing me on what is my contingency plan? What if we go to patients, do our first clinical study and it goes terribly or the device doesn't work? At first I gave some generic answers and said, this is how we can pivot or this is what we can do. But then eventually I realized, you know what? As an investor, what I would want to hear is that I'm going to be, as the entrepreneur, responsible with your dollars. So that's what I ended up saying. I said, listen, if it doesn't work, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to you and say, thank you for the $2 million. Here's the $1 million that we didn't use. And please invest in my next idea because this didn't end up working. And so I think failing fast and showing that you have the maturity to be able to say that and actually do it, I think that really impressed them.
If you could speak to a room of entrepreneurs, what about being a CEO that they're going to get a rude awakening when they have to go run a company?
That it's about falling in love with the people and not being in love with the technology. I think our minds are very focused on the quantitative, on the checklist, on if I do all of these things, then it will equal this, right? And that's really just not the case. Entrepreneurship is an art, even in a highly technical field like MedTech.
And what does the roles of accelerators play within MedTech startup success? And have you been a part of any accelerators?
We were part of this accelerator, so Texas Medical Center, as well as MedTech Innovator. And I think the biggest piece, the curriculum, all of that stuff is great. The syllabus, the courses, the speakers that they bring in, all of that is incredible. But I would say for me, the value that's been added most is a community. MedTech entrepreneurship can be really lonely. Entrepreneurship in general can be really lonely. Being a founder can be lonely. And these accelerators give you the opportunity to be around so many other like-minded individuals, so many other founders that may be working on a different problem, but they're going through the same process, right?
For those engineers or physicians or those stereotypical personas that are not necessarily the party animals and the gregarious extroverts, how important in MedTech entrepreneurship is networking?
It's crucial. I think without the people, it's really hard to succeed in this world. And I think that's true in any field, honestly. But I think especially when you are an early stage entrepreneur, that having mentors that open doors, having peers that want to connect you with the investors that they have, that's crucial. So I like to say my metaphor that I use a lot is like MedTech is like high school. So MedTech innovation, MedTech entrepreneurship is like high school. And as long as you're a little popular, eventually you'll get asked to prom, right? So you'll get that acquisition or that funding or whatever it is. But without connecting into that network,